Hello, glad you could join me. Today's adventure is all about evolution, specifically one YouTuber's understanding of evolution. The YouTuber goes by the name of Rocking Mr. E. His YouTube channel is called Rocking Philosophy. So he presents as a philosophical content creator and even uses the Greek symbol phi as part of his channel's branding. Rocking Philosophy is not a small channel. He has, at the time I recorded this, around 28,000 subscribers. The video we will be considering had around 3,000 views in the first 24 hours, which is quite a good engagement rate. And when we read the comments, it seems to have been well received by his target audience. The title of the video that we will be considering is The Pseudoscience of Evolution, in which Rocking Mr. E makes the bold claim that evolution doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. So, the one thing we could not accuse him of is lack of ambition. Let's not underestimate the daunting objective he's set himself here. He is going to disprove perhaps the most evidence theory in science, and will do so in less than 12 minutes. So let's take a critical look at his philosophical position, his understanding of the science, and whether he is successful in his ambition or not.
Evolution doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny. I've made several videos about the random formation of existence versus creation and design. Having already explored the rational proof for God, as well as the ancient and occult history of evolution, in this video I will return to a purely rational and empirical analysis, demonstrating that, even on this basis, evolution doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
We pause here because he will go on to qualify a reference of the goddess Kali he had made in an earlier video, so it's not really relevant here. But before we skip ahead, in case you missed it, in all the excitement, he slipped in quite a claim in his introduction. In his introduction he said, and I quote, "The ancient and occult history of evolution." So one presumes that our hero has a video floating around in which he claims not only to prove the existence of God by rational and empirical argument, but also establishes the link between evolutionary theory and the occult. It was at this point that I nearly binned this entire project, but let's continue. We shall pick it up at 127.
Whether or not you've watched my previous videos on evolution, I endeavour to make each video a standalone subject that doesn't rely too much on previous material. This does have limits when it comes to a wider understanding of a complex subject, but discrediting evolution can still be done purely through the arguments in this video. To do this, we have to start with a fundamental explanation of evolution, which is prone to a great deal of selective reasoning. Rather ironic when evolution is based on different forms of selection.
He did seem quite taken with his attempt at irony, didn't he? So this video then, he claims, is a self-contained refutation of evolution, which is convenient because now we need not concern ourselves with any arguments he has made elsewhere. Shall we continue?
Evolution stems from the theory of natural selection, where nature selects for the strongest qualities through survival success. What evolutionists do is merge other more logical and observable science in with their theory, meaning that if you disagree with them, you can then be accused of disagreeing with other, more established and observable explanations for the formation of life. Allow me to demonstrate this.
Before we go on to the demonstration, there are a few points we need to address. The most important, I believe, is that we need to make a distinction between biogenesis, that is the formation of life, and evolution itself, which is a theory that seeks to describe development of different forms. Evolutionary theory makes no claims regarding biogenesis. In order for evolution to occur, we presume replication, that is, life already exists. How that life came into existence is another matter. Biogenesis does not impact the theory of evolution in any substantive way. Rocking Mr. E is conflating two very different areas of interest here, and I suspect I know why. The other point I would raise is Rocking Mr. E's use of the term evolutionist. The use of this term seems intended to cast evolutionary scientists in a particular light in the minds of his listeners. This is a rhetorical trick. As a rhetorical device, it is clumsy. It's often employed by sophists who are inclined towards appeals to pathos rather than philosophers. So that's something to be mindful of as we proceed.
All animals must survive different challenges in their environment, and evolutionists refer to this as selection pressure, selective pressure, or, if they're being really sneaky, evolutionary pressure. The animals that are best at surviving have the greatest chance of passing on their DNA to the next generation. So far, nothing about this is controversial or disagreed upon by the vast majority of people. But then evolutionists delve into the land of speculation that, consciously or otherwise, introduces occult theories of evolution that have never, ever been conclusively proven at any time and place.
Let's pause here because again he references the occult. Let's listen to that bit again.
But then evolutionists delve into the land of speculation that, consciously or otherwise, introduces occult theories of evolution that have never, ever been conclusively proven at any time and place.
So, these evolutionists, which I suppose includes biologists, microbiologists, geneticists, paleontologists, and evolutionary scientists, have all subscribed to a theory, the origin of which Rocking Mr. E claims to be the occult, and for some reason, all these scientists have failed to notice. I'm not really sure how best to respond to this, so I think we shall just move on.
To get around this, they provide faulty reasoning that doesn't make any distinction between micro and macro evolution or speciation versus adaptation.
We shall pause again because there are 2 points raised here and both indicate a fundamental misunderstanding of the science. We do not treat micro and macro evolution as distinct because they are not. It is the same evolutionary process. The difference between the two is temporal and physical scale. Yeast multiply faster than sheep, and they're quite a bit smaller. That is your difference, Rocking Mr. E. It's as simple as that. Macroevolution and microevolution describe fundamentally identical processes, but at different scales. I suspect I know why you try and leverage this, but it's pretty much a non-argument. The same for your reference to evolutionary adaptation and speciation. It's a nonsense. You are misapprehending the fundamentals of the theory you were seeking to criticise, but this is a theme we shall return to later. Rocking Mr. E has himself alluded to species, and speciation itself is evidence of macroevolution. Go to any museum and see the evidence of gradual change in mammals from one form to another. Speciation is wrote large in the fossil record and even the genome. There are large volumes of scientific evidence that demonstrate speciation. All this evidence comes from many different fields of study. Rocking Mr. E will shortly claim that speciation has never been observed at macro level. That claim is factually incorrect. All you need to do to satisfy yourself that this is the case is do a simple Google search and view the evidence. Now, let's move on.
Evolutionists claim that genetic mutations lead to something as sophisticated as every single complex organic life form we see around us, let alone the eye, mammals going from the ocean to land and back again, and so many other individual examples of complexity in nature. Before I explain how statistically impossible that is, people need to realise that no one has ever observed this process on a macro scale, which evolutionists call speciation, the process that causes completely new species of animals and plant life.
Now, it was at this point that I realised that Rocking Mr. E did not actually know what a species was. Species are sometimes known as subgroups. If you separate any population and place them in different environments, you will notice incremental changes between the two groups. At some point in the distant future, these incremental changes would have accumulated to such a degree that the two groups would no longer be able to interbreed. It is at this point that speciation is complete. Darwin's finches are an example of speciation in progress. But of course, if we were to take Rocking Mr. E's hypothesis seriously, we would have to set aside Darwin's observations. We would have to believe that there are no different finch populations on the Galapagos Islands. Nope, they just simply don't exist.
The way that evolutionists try to get around this is so disingenuous that it can only possibly be described as indoctrination or the propaganda of those determined to push an agenda. If you ask an evolutionist how these mutations work, they say that, by pure chance, a gene randomly mutates. And it must be pure chance when there is no designer or creator involved.
Yeah, I think I do detect some sleight of hand. And it can hardly be described as subtle at this point. I'm not going to list every misconception here. This video would turn into a feature-length film if I did that. However, for clarity, while the genetic errors are random, natural selection is not. Evolution itself is not a random process. It is a process that operates at the level of the organism. The detail of this process falls outside the scope of this video. But the viewer should be in no doubt that Rocking Mr. E's continued emphasis on chance is at best misleading. As Richard Dawkins stated in The Selfish Gene, and I paraphrase here, it is grindingly obvious that if Darwinism were really a theory of chance, it couldn't work. Rocking Mr. E will now drift towards an appeal to complexity.
The mutated gene is then passed on to the next generation via sexual selection. Note the sleight of hand here, where perfectly acceptable explanations for the formation of life are thrown into the mix. Animals do indeed sexually select for their mates when they choose their reproductive partners, by being attracted to certain desirable characteristics. You could therefore logically agree that natural selection is a good explanation for the way that animals survive so-called selection pressures in nature. But that's where the common sense ends, when we're expected to believe that all these random mutations eventually lead to an infinite series of well-formed accidents like the heart, lungs, teeth, and indeed an entire species with its own set of unique characteristics. And what do evolutionists use as proof when you question this? I kid you not, breeding animals. Let's test that hypothesis. If I bred dogs over multiple generations, deliberately trying to select for certain traits until I got an animal like the pug, bulldog, husky, boxer, and so many other subspecies originating from wolves, is this the same as natural selection? The answer is an emphatic no. The clue is in the term natural selection. If something is naturally selected, there is no intervention or artificial selection that we see with animal breeding. Quite the opposite. We deliberately select for certain traits until we get the desired outcome.
Yeah, I'm beginning to suspect that this is not so much a philosophical treatise, but rather an extended job application for membership of Kraut and T's academic team. The terms you mention, Rocking Mr. E, natural selection and artificial selection, are not the same, but if we look closely, we might detect they share a common term. The common term is selection. The type of selection changes. While evolution is driven by environmental pressures in natural selection, it is we who drive evolutionary change in artificial selection. In nature, the selecting agent is the environment. On the farm, kennel or stable, the selecting agency is human. But the process is the same in both cases. As Richard Dawkins pointed out, dog breeds represent isolated genetic islands. The selection pressure, in that case, is applied by humans. But the process, Mr. E, in both cases, is essentially the same. Also, if I can point out the obvious here, the diagram Rocking Mr. E used in support of his thesis demonstrates speciation between dog and wolf, but that is hardly unique. We could also consider donkey and horse. Although they can still mate, the offspring, the mule, is sterile, so the horse and donkey are on the cusp of a speciation event.
If you don't accept this premise, then answer this. Does this process result in a brand new species? Has anyone ever bred a dog, for example, and by pure chance a mutation occurs that would indicate the beginning of a new species, like a limb or appendage of some kind?
What? Like a crocoduck, for example. I can't believe he just seriously suggested this. Hands up anyone who has any doubts about which rabbit hole our philosopher Rocking Mr. E has dived into. It should at this point be obvious that Rocking Mr. E has little grasp on the fundamentals. But how did he get to this point? That, I think, will become obvious shortly.
The answer is no, because all you get is different subspecies of dogs based on wolf species DNA. As we can see, all the animal breeding that human beings have done over thousands of years has never led to any speciation or so-called macroevolution. And this is where evolutionists become increasingly irate and disingenuous.
Oh, but evolution occurs on the micro and even quantum scale all the time. We've observed this in lab conditions, and this is proof that evolution takes place.
What evolutionists are doing here is suggesting that mutations in bacteria and viruses, or even replicating atoms, are somehow the same as evolution. Let's take a virus like the common cold. When this mutates, does it become something other than the common cold? No. The same can be said for influenza, bacteria such as E. coli, or any number of microscopic viruses and bacteria. Yes, they adapt to survival pressures, but that is not speciation, just like the huge variety of dogs isn't speciation either. Once again, we see how evolutionists are not being honest in the way they present their theories. The evidence that evolutionists cite is actually a demonstration of adaptation to environmental pressures that causes a huge variety of gene expression all around us. But this has nothing to do with speciation and random mutation whatsoever. Put simply, there are many genes in nature, and these can express themselves in an infinite number of ways. But at no time can this lead to one animal becoming a completely new species. Before people say there's a scientific consensus for evolution, there isn't one. What we actually have are the usual silencing tactics by established orthodoxy, just as we see with transgenderism, anthropogenic climate change, feminism, and all the other politically correct dogma you absolutely cannot question. There is, however, a growing backlash against this, as demonstrated by over 1,000 scientists publicly stating their skepticism of evolution on a site called Dissent from Darwin.org.
Oh look, lab coats. Oh, we're all getting very scientific now, aren't we? The interesting thing about this video is that when you look at the description box, Rocking Mr. E seems to have forgotten to include any links or references. I'm sure this is just an oversight on his part, and to save him the bother, I shall include the relevant links in the description box below this video, because that's just the type of guy I am. Now, this paper he cites, A Scientific Dissent from Darwinism, is published on a site with the same name. When we look at who finances the website, we find that it is the Discovery Institute, a right-wing Christian think tank, who some might know aggressively pushes intelligent design. Rocking Mr. E, it seems, has gone full creationist. I will not detail here the criticism levelled at both the website and this particular paper. I will include a link to the Wikipedia article if you want a flavour of that, but for our purposes, it can best be described as flawed. There are serious questions in relation to the accreditations claimed by many of the signatories. Intelligent design is simply creationism masquerading as science in order to teach the controversy in American schools, and this has been proven in a court of law. So we shouldn't waste any more time on this nonsense. If you're curious, even if all the signatories were accredited in the relevant fields, which apparently many are not, then the total number of signatories amounts to around 0.023% of scientists. So the 99.9% of scientists accept evolutionary theory.
The final nail in the coffin for evolution is the sheer statistical impossibility of life being driven by random mutation. If you doubt this, the odds for just one gene coming into existence through random mutation is 10 to the power of 127, or 10 with 127 zeros after it. When you consider that it's commonly accepted that the number of particles in the universe is 10 to the power of 80, you realise how impossible it is to successfully hit those odds so many times that it forms all the complex life around us.
Now what is that? That sounds like a very small figure. 10 to the power of 80 is what physics claims is the number of particles in the entire universe.
Almost there, dear viewer. It's been a bit of an adventure, hasn't it? Now then, can you guess what type of organisation AmazingDiscoveries.org is? If you guessed creationist, you are correct. The speaker in this video is Walter Veith, a well-known creationist, whose expertise in probability matches that of Rocking Mr. E's expertise in science and philosophy. A Wikipedia article on Mr. Veith can be found in the description box below. I believe the video is part of a series which can be found on the Amazing Discoveries YouTube channel. If you want to look it up, knock yourself out. But his main thesis revolves around the same misapprehension that Rocking Mr. E labours under. That is, that evolutionary theory involves pure chance, that it is random by nature. As Richard Dawkins has pointed out, if this was the case, if this was true, then it simply would not work as a theory. What Veith tries to do is leverage the random nature of a single element, the gene mutation, and tries to paint the entire process as one of chance. This is simply wrong. Mr. Veith is being dishonest in his presentation of evolutionary theory. So, we come to the end of our adventure together. What do you think? Did Rocking Mr. E dismantle evolution, or should we have given him a few more minutes? Apparently, a few years ago, he found atheism. Now, he has found religion. He seems to be one of these people who goes through life finding things. Now, he has found an audience who seem receptive to his arguments. We end our adventure at this point. I hope you found something of interest in this video. If you would like to support my channel, I now have a Subscribestar page. If you're unable to support my work through Subscribestar, you can share, like or comment. It's all good. Thank you for watching.